NC Pork. Good for the plate, great for the state. Welcome into the North Carolina Sports Network's continuing coverage of the 2025 ACC Men's Basketball Tournament here in the Queen City of Charlotte, presented by North Carolina Pork. Great for your plate, good for the state. I am Mike Waddell, joined by the 38-year ACC Tournament veteran David Glenn. And DG, it will be Duke and Louisville matching up on Saturday night, later on tonight, right here at the Spectrum Center. Be sure to follow us on social media, folks, at the NC Sportsnet, and also visit our website, all brand new as we head into March Madness, ncsportsnetwork.com. Now, my day started at the Joel Coliseum in Winston-Salem at the North Carolina High School Athletic Association Basketball Championships, where 4 new state champions were crowned today. There'll be 4 more on Saturday crowned from the 2A and the 4A classifications. Now, earlier today, it was Corby and Community in the 1A Men's Championship game in overtime, 58-55 over Southern Wake Academy. The next game, it was a barn burner, over 9,000 people in Joel Coliseum for the Cherokee Braves win over East Bladen, 84-48. Then in the third game of the day, it was the 3A women doing battle for a state championship. Western Alamance topping Stuart Kramer, 78-58. And then in the last game, just over about an hour ago, in the 3A men's game, it was Southern Durham and Ben L. Smith out of Greensboro. And in this one, Ben L. Smith gets the win in overtime, the second overtime state championship game of the day, 64-62. Now, we move over to right here at the Spectrum Center in Charlotte. And David, game 1 saw Duke hang on for a 74-71 win over North Carolina. Game number 2, another big rally that fell short as Louisville gets the win over Clemson, 76-73. That game just finished here in downtown Charlotte. So let's start our recap of that Carolina-Duke game, the third clash of these two rivals here in the 2025 season. And it looked like in the first half that Duke was going to run away with this one, but North Carolina rallied back. What are your thoughts?
Well, Mike, it's great to be with you again here at the Spectrum Center. I would say that there's some parallels to the 2 games that we saw here in Charlotte today. I mean, Carolina was dead and buried at the half, down 45-24, and your chance of winning is pretty darn low when you're down that much against the number 1 team in the country, especially in the Duke Blue Devils. Meanwhile, Clemson in the nightcap, it wasn't quite as ugly a halftime score, but the Tigers looked dead and buried midway through the second half, and yet both the Tigers and the Tar Heels rallied, certainly didn't throw in the towel, got some juice from the fans, especially when they started to chip away at that lead. And in the end, both of these games went down to the final minute, which is a credit to Carolina, a credit to Clemson. Obviously, one difference, as you and I dive into the details of each game, one big difference is Clemson fans, while disappointed that a top 10 team, an area that Clemson doesn't visit often in men's basketball, and that's where Brad Brownell has his Tigers in the national rankings, Clemson fans were hoping, at a school far more known for Dabo Swinney and the football Tigers, they were hoping to end a 71-year drought as the only original ACC member that had never won this event. This looked like a year they had a chance. Their chances looked even better given the injuries at Duke. But Louisville was the number 2 seed. And just like Duke deserves credit for sending Carolina home, Louisville deserves credit for sending the Clemson Tigers home. They held on even when things got a little scary at the end. But whereas Clemson knows, and it's a little bit of solace, that the Tigers are headed not only to the NCAA tournament, but as one of the stronger seeds that Clemson basketball has ever had in an NCAA tournament. Meanwhile, Carolina, a school that went to 43 out of 46 NCAA tournaments immediately prior to the hiring of Hubert Davis, is right on the edge as it's already Saturday as you and I are having this conversation. Tomorrow is Selection Sunday, And the Tar Heels, I know what the bracketologists are saying right now, but they can't be 100% sure that they're in this field. There are other bubble teams still playing games. And as long as there's a bubble team near you that's still playing, that means they can upgrade their resume when you cannot, as Carolina obviously now eliminated from the ACC tournament. So, again, credit the Tigers and the Tar Heels for coming back. Credit to them both for fighting until the end. But whereas Clemson is just turning the page and going to try to get ready for this next chapter in the big dance, the Tar Heels are going to be maybe biting their fingernails all the way through Selection Sunday, whether they find out whether Hubert Davis has taken them to the big dance for the third time in 4 years, or whether after going to the big dance, 90+% of the time over a 40-year period almost, whether they would miss it for the second time in 4 years. So that's a huge fork in the road that we do not yet have the answer to. But as we dive into the details of both of these games, I think we're going to find that just as there are questions that Carolina fans and Clemson fans can ask, we need to toss some bouquets in the direction of both the Blue Devils and the Cardinals. Duke's the number 1 seed here. Louisville's the number 2 seed here. They proved themselves as 2 of the 3 best teams in the regular season, so there's no surprise here. Louisville's high in the national rankings, as are the Blue Devils. And tomorrow, we'll get to that eventually, or tonight, I guess you'd have to say, since it's Saturday already, either a school's going to be winning the ACC title for the first time. Louisville's only been in the league for a decade roughly, but it would be a first for them in terms of an ACC title. Meanwhile, of course, Duke has won 13 of the last 25 of these tournaments. So it would be, just one more for the school that already has the most ACC championships. So it should be a good matchup on Saturday night. But we can dive more into these details. And there were plenty of them worth discussing in the Devils' close win over the Heels and the Cardinals' close win over the Tigers.
Let's talk about Duke, the big man in the middle. We knew he was going to have a real big impact on this game. He is a talent. Kaman Malawak's 13 points and 9 boards led the way for Duke, and they totally dominated the first half, leading by 21 over North Carolina at the break. This was shades of that game in February back at Cameron Indoor Stadium, and I got to tell you, I didn't think Carolina had it in them to make a comeback, but they started to chip away, chip away, chip away. What was the key to the Carolina mindset in coming back against Duke and trying to make this a game in the last few minutes?
Well, let's give credit to the Devils first, because the guy you mentioned there, Kaman Malawak, for much of his freshman season, has just been a complimentary player on offense for the Blue Devils. He's been a good shot blocker since the day he got to Durham. He's been a good rebounder since the day he got to Durham. But a lot of coaches will tell you at the college level that there is a bigger change between October and March in freshmen than there are in upperclassmen. And I think Malawak fits this description, because at the early stage of this season, whereas he was a very high-end role player, he was not really comfortable catching the ball down low, turning, shooting, scoring. He fumbled the ball a little bit. He was happy to defer offensively. And this was a different player, Mike. This is the guy that the NBA scouts have been projecting as an NBA lottery pick, and maybe a high lottery pick at that. This is part of Jon Scheyer's number 1 overall recruiting class. Of course, Cooper Flagg gets most of the attention, but 2 other parts of that freshman class, in the absence of Cooper Flagg, were central to this Blue Devils victory. It was Malawak with, I would argue, his best game of the season. You talked about plus minus yesterday, which is just, a lot of hockey fans follow that stat in their sport. But in basketball, it just means, how did your team do? What was the point differential only during your time on the floor? Well, for Malawak today, the Blue Devils were plus 17. And that is the most of either player on any player on either Carolina or Duke. So give the young man credit. 13 points, 9 rebounds. He always blocked shots, and he had a couple today. But he was 6 for 8 from the field, and they weren't all dunks. He even hit a three-pointer. You and I have seen him warm up before all these games, and he's a 7-2 guy who can shoot, but he doesn't usually shoot threes during the game because they don't need him to. There's so many weapons. Well, he was phenomenal. And Knippel, the guy that some people gave me a hard time for putting him on my first team All-ACC ballot at the expense of some other players, he played 30 minutes today. He had 17 points. Con Knipple drew 7 fouls from the Tar Heels. Some of them were late, purposeful fouls, trying to play catch up, but some of them were just because Con Knipple was an aggressive guy going to the rim. He hit 3 of his 5 3-pointers. He hit 4 of his 5 free throws, and he also dished 3 assists. And he had some tough defenders on him. I mean, Drake Powell was on him. Seth Trimble was on him. Those were the Tar Heels' 2 best perimeter defenders. And yet Con Knipple, without Cooper Flagg taking some of that pressure off of him, absolutely delivered what the Blue Devils needed from him. And Malawach down low absolutely delivered what the Blue Devils needed from him. Malawach, remember, has 7 inches in height on the Tar Heels' main center, Van Allen Lubin. Whatever Lubin's listed as, you could see. I mean, Malawach was almost a head taller than Van Allen Lubin, who played well and played tough and played hard. But Malawach is the future lottery pick. Con Knipple's going to be a first-round NBA pick. And those guys showed that Duke this year is much more, than Cooper Flagg and the traveling circus. Duke got big-time performances from its 2 freshmen. They got a solid performance from Tyrese Proctor, who's been a very reliable guy for them as a third-year starter. Isaiah Evans didn't shoot well today, but he defended well today. Patrick Gongba, coming off the bench, a guy who didn't play much early this season, was very reliable in 16 minutes. He had 12 points and 3 rebounds in the biggest game of his freshman season. That's just a phenomenal performance by Duke's young players against a desperate Carolina team that needed this win to be sure they're in the big dance. They're still hoping they are, but now it's up to the selection committee and all sorts of things beyond the Tar Heels' control. But it was really those Duke freshmen who rose to the occasion and sent the Tar Heels back to Chapel Hill.
The other thing you really got to give Duke credit for is their defensive effort on RJ Davis. He is the scorer. He is the gas for this Carolina offense, but he didn't make a 3-pointer and he didn't hit double figures. I mean, that has to be disappointing for North Carolina's scheme offensively to not do something to counter that, to make that comeback and not have really any major impact shots made by RJ Davis. I mean, he's known for the long ball, DG, but he has not been able to get that off in a lot of big games. And in this one, just like some of the other big games over the past few years, RJ Davis just unable to shake free. And as a result, Carolina, they get down, they come back, but they can't close out these comeback wins.
Yeah, I think you're circling a big point here because in our preview show, one of my thoughts was Con Knipple's going to get his for Duke, and he certainly did. But I thought RJ Davis was kind of going to get his for Carolina, and he didn't. But there's a lot of reasons for that. Essentially, Duke played 1.5 men on RJ Davis throughout that entire game. It's not that RJ just flat out had a bad game or a cold shooting night. Whoever was the primary defender on RJ Davis had help to his right at all times and had help to his left at all times. In other words, John Shire said, if the Tar Heels are going to beat the Blue Devils, his defensive game plan was it's going to be somebody not named RJ Davis. And once that became clear, and to RJ's credit, I mean, he hit 4 of 10 field goals. He just didn't have a lot of open looks, man. RJ is tough as the day is long. He's a smart player. Obviously, when he's open, he's a heck of a 3-point shooter. He has rallied over this past month plus where his 3-point shooting and other parts of his game have been much better than they were early this season. But the bottom line is he is a 6-foot even man. He's roughly my size. I have stood next to RJ Davis many times. I'm listed as 6 feet tall on my driver's license, and I look eyeball to eyeball with RJ Davis. And 6 foot tall RJ Davis, first team All-American last year, second team All-ACC this year, was playing against the tallest team in America. There's not a guy under 6'5" on the entire Duke rotation. So his primary defender is 6'5" or taller. Sion James is this muscular, imposing figure. Isaiah Evans, the freshman, is a tall guy with long arms. Tyrese Proctor's a good defender. So RJ's given up 5, 6 or more inches in height to his primary defender. And if he gets by his primary defender, there's 7'2" Kaman Malawach, one of the best shot blockers in the entire ACC. Or there's Patrick Ngongba, who's 6'10" or 6'11". So I don't know if RJ's numbers were as much a reflection of him playing poorly as Duke having a great game plan and Duke executing that game plan. And they just said, we're going to make RJ Davis give the ball up. He's not going to get any clean looks from 3-point land. And he didn't. Maybe he had one and he missed that one. All of his shots were difficult. And I think he just did what Hubert Davis would have wanted him to do, which was not to take low percentage shots, but try to find your open teammates. Van Allen Lubin ended up with 20 points. Elliot Cadeau ended up with 15 points. Seth Trimble ended up with 14 points. So other guys did help. And that's why it ended up being a close game as the Tar Heels made that rally from 45-24 down at the half to outscoring the Blue Devils 47-29 in the second half. At halftime, I would not have bet on that kind of a comeback. So it's a tribute to the Tar Heels' heart that they made it a game in the final minute. And then obviously you have the unspeakable mistake of Jalen Withers on the Van Allen Lubin free throw attempt that could have tied the game. Nobody wanted to answer that question in the post game, I can tell you, but I've been at 38 straight ACC tournaments, and I can tell you I've seen lane violations. I have never seen a lane violation with the game on the line in that kind of a circumstance. And that's something that's obviously going to haunt Jalen Withers, a guy who's from Charlotte, North Carolina, is in his fifth and final season of college basketball, and he doesn't want that to be the last thing that Carolina fans remember him by.
David, you did a great job of breaking that down on your Twitter account, how the rule is explained, that it was absolutely the right call. If we were in the NBA, if this was a Hornets game and not the ACC tournament, maybe there would be a different interpretation. But
Yeah.
You mentioned the postgame. UNC head coach Hubert Davis was a bit coy in that postgame media meeting, refusing straight-up answers to several journalist questions from the room, including former WRAL sports director Bob Holliday and yourself. Now, often this season, including tonight, Coach Davis comes across as uncomfortable with the media doing their jobs and can appear to act like wins and losses are not really a priority, pushing back with loquacious speeches about ethereal aspirations and otherworldly pursuits. Otherworldly priorities, perhaps. What do you think are Coach Davis's goals in avoiding direct answers to very professional and responsible questions that he's being presented?
Yeah, it's hard for me to read his mind on that. I've known Hubert Davis personally since he was 18 years old. I visited his hometown. I met with his father and his sister in the kitchen of the house where Hubert Davis grew up in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I interviewed him when he was a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior at Carolina. He shared with me as a very young man, Mike, the fact that he was not a young person of faith and that his own mother's death really shook him up when he was a young man. I believe that was prior to him even arriving at Carolina or maybe very early in his time in Chapel Hill. But certainly it's incredibly impactful if you lose a parent when you're in your teenage years. So Hubert was willing to share with me when he was a young man, and others, of course. But I wrote very in-depth articles on him, and he shared a lot of very personal stuff, including the fact that he went from a man who was not of devout faith to a man who clearly is. And in response to my question, he talked a lot about his relationship with Jesus. And he talked about how everything he does and everything he views through the prism of his faith, which I'm fine with. And certainly I would imagine Carolina fans are fine with. And I don't know why you wouldn't be fine with all that. But I, of course, have interviewed many, many coaches and players, many of whom are people of deep faith. And when he dodged the question about Jalen Withers. Maybe you could say he just didn't want to say something bad about one of his own players. You and I can say it's a boneheaded mistake. It's incredible that a fifth-year senior with the game on the line and your ACC tournament on the line would make that kind of mental mistake. You can say that. I can say that. I do. And I don't feel bad about saying it. The facts are the facts. You cannot be a fifth-year senior in that circumstance and lose your focus and step into the lane. For those who don't know, in the NBA, if you accidentally step in the lane early but you get back out before the shooter shoots, it's not a violation. Those referees at the pro level do not have to call that if you get out in time. The college rule is simply if you step in before the free throw shooter shoots, the refs have to call it. And there's 3 refs out there. 2 of them right away called it. For any fans who aren't sure, it's the right call. It's going to be called 100 times out of 100 times at the college level. And 2 of the 3 guys out there were right on it. Van Allen Lubin does have a little hitch in his free throw routine. But if you're his teammate, you're supposed to know that he has a little hitch in his free throw routine. And even if you're not sure what his free throw routine is, the last thing you can do is step in the lane early when the guy's trying to tie the game in the final minute. So maybe reading between the lines for Hubert Davis, he clearly, and I respect the fact that he said, hey, they're a team, right? They're a group of players and coaches, so they're not going to throw any single person under the bus. I think most people respect and understand why a coach would want to go down that road. But in response to my question in particular, there's nothing wrong with saying, my question for those who didn't hear the post-game press conference was, Coach, you coach in a sport and you played in a sport, meaning college basketball specifically, where everything and everybody's definition of success includes making the NCAA tournament and trying to do good things once you get there. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a wonderful relationship with your God, whoever that might be. Dean Smith is a man I covered. Dean Smith was a man of devout faith. Smith would have his spiritual goals, if you will, that he did not speak a lot about publicly, but he would also have his basketball goals. We're not living in an either or world where you as a coach or as a player have to say, the only prism I look through is through my prism of faith. Dean Smith, as a man of faith, would say both. This is how I view myself as a teacher, as a mentor of young men, as an educator. He saw himself essentially as a professor whose classroom was the basketball court. And I respected that about Coach Smith and many other great coaches that I've followed and covered. And I respect that about Hubert Davis as well. But Dean Smith would not say that whereas he views everything he does through the prism of his faith, that excludes that he has basketball goals too. I mean, this is a legendary Hall of Fame coach, Mike, who, as you know, growing up watching ACC basketball, one of the famous stories about Dean Smith is that on his 1993 team, he put a picture of the Louisiana Superdome in the players' lockers prior to the season, which clearly means that Dean Smith, man of faith, who has his spiritual goals, not only has very basketball-specific goals, but he shares them with his players. And in that specific example, he even shared the preseason goal of believing that those Tar Heels of 1993 could make it to New Orleans and win the darn national championship. So his faith did not prevent him from having very basketball-specific goals, again, in a sport that is essentially defined by March Madness. As you and I look around this league and all the questions we get from fans and other media, how does the conversation start about Steve Forbes' Wake Forest? It doesn't start with his faith. It doesn't start with what a nice guy he is. It doesn't start with him being a transfer whisperer. It starts with him being at Wake for 5 years and he hasn't made the big dance yet. That's where it starts. Now, you could argue whether it's right or wrong, but that's where it starts, right? Like Brad Brownell only made 2 tournaments in his first 10 years at Clemson. But you know what? The rules changed and the world changed and NIL and transfer portal and immediate eligibility. And now Brad Brownell's had him to the Elite 8 last year, and he's going to be a high seed this year, right? So again, the conversation around Coach Brownell or Coach Forbes or anybody else includes really close to the top of the list. How often you go to the NCAA tournament? What do you do when you get there? That was the spirit behind what I think everybody that I know would consider a fair question, whether it's media relations people, coaches themselves, fellow media members. I certainly am not going to apologize for asking that question. Hubert, in a sport that's largely defined by getting to the big dance and doing well there, how do you describe its place in your vision of success? I'm paraphrasing my question. Right. And he essentially blew off my question, just like he blew off the questions about the lane violation. And he talked about his relationship with Jesus, which again is great. And he has shared that many, many times. And I would never discourage him from sharing it, whatever is in his heart. But after sharing that lens or that prism that he looks at all this through, and I think it's great that he views himself as a mentor of young men. And that's how he views success in his world. But that, again, it's not an either or proposition. You can view your primary role on this planet as being a mentor of young men and this basketball family. There's nothing wrong with that. But it doesn't have to be exclusive, right? All sorts of legendary coaches, all sorts of legendary athletes were both devout in their faith and still willing to share what their basketball goals were, or in my Dean Smith example, eventually shared a preseason basketball goal. I don't know any coach that doesn't go in with some basketball goals. It's easier to see why Hubert Davis didn't want to throw Jalen Withers under the bus. And rather than kind of walk around the question, he just dodged it entirely rather than giving us some coach speak. It's harder to understand why he would not give a candid answer to a fair question about this is a school that made the NCAA tournament almost 95% of the time prior to his being elevated to the head coach position. And either he's going to be 3 out of 4, which is pretty solid, 75% of the time, or he's going to be 2 out of 4 if he doesn't get the benefit of the doubt on Selection Sunday. It's absolutely a fair question. Somebody had to ask it. I don't mind being the one to ask it. And I think it was a missed opportunity for him to, again, share what you want about your faith and how that defines your success. But your job as a basketball coach also does include winning games and competing for championships at a school like Carolina. Now, he can put that in his own words however he would like, but to dodge it entirely, I don't think is going to do him any favors with how not all, but many Carolina fans view him and his unwillingness to provide candid answers to very legitimate and fair questions.
Well, it definitely started to give me some of that late November 2024 Mac Brown vibe. When Mac Brown was standing at the podium where people were asking him about winning games or not doing this or that. And he said, well, some people are interested in winning games. I'm interested in saving lives. That's just disingenuous. That's avoiding the thing. And it's the pressure started to get to Mac. That was very obvious. I mean, he started to crack with James Madison in that post game. Literally cracked. And now I'm not saying that Hubert Davis is cracking, but it just doesn't show a lot of resolve and give people confidence in this basketball program. You're talking about how many times he personally has missed the tournament, perhaps if they don't get the call on Sunday, but they also missed the tournament as a program in 2020. People like to say, well, there wasn't an NCAA tournament that year. Yet your season was over, Carolina fans, when they postponed the NCAA tournament. You had already lost out of the ACC tournament. You weren't going anywhere. So if that's 3 times in 6 years that North Carolina's basketball program is not in the tournament that matters, that's a brand challenge. And we talked about earlier in the day on Friday the fact that Duke had won 13 of the last 25, 26 championships here in the ACC tournament. This vibe around the Spectrum Center was very different than any of the other 24 ACC tournaments that I've attended in person. Now, I took a break with my administrative career from 1998 until this year. Didn't go to these tournaments, but man, this is a different vibe now. It's not a big Carolina contingent anymore. Charlotte is not a Carolina town anymore. This is a mostly ambivalent college sports town, no matter what people may choose to tell you from the ACC office. And it's just a different vibe. And so I have to ask you, this is the big question. Come Sunday night, do you feel North Carolina will be in the field of 68, or will the Tar Heels, the North Carolina basketball program, be outside of March Madness for the 3rd time since 2020?
Well, don't let me forget to answer that question, but I want to squeeze one other thing in here, because just as I want to give John Shire a bouquet for that pregame, essentially the defensive game plan that focused on RJ Davis, because it's one thing to ask your best defender to deal with RJ Davis and take advantage of the length and wingspan advantage. It's another thing to have 5 guys working together like fingers in a glove, so that whichever way RJ went, there was somebody waiting for him, not always as a double team, but as help defenders. If he went left, help defenders if he went right. So few good looks. I also do want to give a bouquet to Carolina for one aspect of the postgame, whereas I don't understand Hubert Davis's approach for reasons we just discussed. I'll give Coach Davis credit for this, and I'll give Carolina. I wish I knew who the decision maker was, because I want to give this person credit. typically locker rooms are open after these games at ACC tournaments, okay? Typically you bring a couple or three players to the podium. So Carolina brought only Coach Davis and RJ Davis. That's not extremely unusual. Obviously, RJ's this fifth-year record-setting senior. The head coach is always there. And then typically the locker room is open. Well, today they announced that the Carolina locker room was not open and that three players came out. And none of those three players was named Jalen Withers. And I was wondering what that pecking order was, right? Because the ACC officials have some input. Steve Kirshner's a veteran media relations guy. Matt Bowers is another guy in charge of men's basketball. Clint Gwaltney is here and, accompanied Hubert Davis and RJ Davis to the press conference. And I was really, I was surprised that Jalen Withers, who's a fifth-year senior and a grown young man, I know he was down. You could see the tears in his eyes as he walked off the court 10 feet in front of us at the end of that horrible ending, as he feels like he cost the Tar Heels not the game, but a chance to win the game, a chance to tie the game. Who knows what might have happened after that if he did not step into the lane. Well, I think cooler heads prevailed after the original closed the locker room. Three guys trot out, and eventually they did bring Jalen Withers and made other players available, which I think is the right decision. So I think somebody made the wrong decision and somebody might have overruled the wrong decision. And to Hubert Davis's credit and to Jalen Withers' credit, they both came out. In fact, they came out arm in arm. And Hubert Davis, like the protective big brother or uncle or whatever, had his arm around Jalen Withers as the young man who made a mental mistake and felt horrible, answered some hard questions from the media. I think that's life lessons, right? The lesson is not you just screwed up, so go hide in the locker room and we're going to create this new rule about, locker rooms are usually open, but not in this set of circumstances. No, they eventually, somebody made the right decision. And to his credit, you can dodge. It's not like you're going to torture the young man. They asked him some questions. Hubert Davis kept his arm around him the entire time. So you're protecting your bear cub, right? But while also asking him to face the music. You don't have to leave him out there forever.
Great life skill.
What kind of a life lesson is it to let him hide in the locker? So they found the right way. And maybe someday Hubert Davis will be a little more comfortable in his own skin and a little bit more willing to share. Of course, he has basketball-related goals. And of course, Carolina fans who spend a lot of time, money, energy, and resources on following the Tar Heels would at some point want him to verbalize what those goals are. And it should hurt. If you're the Carolina head coach, again, nothing wrong with mentoring young men. Wonderful that you have a spiritual relationship with your God. Beautiful. I don't think anybody's going to complain about that. But your job description also does include, if you want to keep your job, winning games, getting to tournaments, doing well there, in addition to all the spiritual stuff and the mentoring. And I me, Mike, I'm a person who believes no matter what you do for a living, if you're known for being an even better person than whatever you do, for being good at what you do for a living, I consider that a win. That's not a bad thing to have on your tombstone. But the idea that the spiritual part has to be at the exclusion of the other part is simply nonsensical. And whether somebody has to whisper that in Hubert's ear or he has to come that through his realization himself, whatever. He's 4 years in now as a head coach. Again, share whatever you want about mentorship and spirituality, but answer questions about your basketball goals in a sport that is defined by March Madness, whether you want to admit it or not, and give the paying customers fair answers. This is not about the media deserving answers. The media is a conduit. I ask hard, fair questions, not because I get giggles out of it, but because part of the media's job, when it's done correctly, is to ask legitimate questions on behalf of the people who spend time, money, and energy following their favorite team or following their favorite sport or following the ACC tournament or anything else. There's a better way than what we saw today, and I hope Hubert finds it.
We'd like to remind everybody to go to ESPN.com and register for the Men's and Women's Bracket Challenge contest. It'll come out on Sunday. That's when we're going to find out where Duke is going to be seated, where Clemson will be seated, where Louisville will be seated, and hopefully where North Carolina will be seated. If you're a Tar Heels fan, be sure to join our North Carolina Sports Network group. We will be giving away free bacon for a year, courtesy of North Carolina Pork, to everyone. Well, you'll be eligible, not to everybody, but you'll be eligible to win that free bacon for a year if you register by midnight on Sunday. Of course, registration will go through 12:15 Eastern Time this coming Thursday, when the first games will tip off in the regular field of 64. That's after the first four in Dayton. It's going to be a lot of fun, bacon and basketball, right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. Now,
let me follow up on your earlier question, because I forgot to answer the part that I told you.
5 minutes left before we get kicked out.
Well, the part that I told you to remind me in case I forgot to answer. Here's the bottom line. There's about 6 teams for 4 spots. And Xavier's on the bubble, and Carolina's on the bubble, and Texas is on the bubble, and Boise State is on the bubble, and Indiana's on the bubble, and Colorado State's on the bubble. And 1 or 2 of those teams is still playing, Mike. Right. And that's why I would stop short of guaranteeing that the Heels are in or guaranteeing that the Heels are out. They're one of the last 4 or 5 teams for 3 or 4 spots. They looked like an NCAA tournament team by only losing by 3 to the number 1 team in the country. They've looked like an NCAA tournament team by winning so often down the stretch, with their only recent losses being to the Duke Blue Devils. But again, there's 6 teams for 4 spots. And some teams have a chance to upgrade their resumes. Tar Heels have run out of chances to upgrade their resumes. So that I wanted to make sure we got that in there.
Absolutely. Game 2 here at the Spectrum Center last night, Friday night, number 2 seed Louisville taking on 3rd seeded Clemson. It was a back and forth game in the first half. Louisville had a 5-point lead at the break. Then they broke out some big leads in the second half. It was pretty much all Cardinals, as Pat Kelsey's first edition was looking strong out to a big double-digit lead. But then Clemson came back. Again, some funny things happening at the end of the game, and Clemson could not get off a good look there, and the final score ends up being the Cards by 3, 76-73. DG, heading into this season, Louisville fans, nowhere in their wildest dreams would have ever projected a second-place finish in the ACC regular season, and then a spot opposite Duke here in Charlotte in the championship game. But later on tonight, that's what it's going to be. Duke and Louisville. Cooper Flagg already been ruled out for this game. Duke and Louisville only played 1 time this year. It was back in December, and Flagg went for 20 and 12. That was a 76-65 win for the Blue Devils at the Yum Center. What do you think's going to go on? Well, first of all, what were your impressions of the Louisville win over Clemson? And then what are your thoughts as we close out this edition for the big Duke game tomorrow night for the championship against Louisville?
Again, as I said to start the show, give the Tigers credit for fighting back from that second half deficit where it looked like they were dead. I crafted a tweet that basically previewed Duke against Louisville in the championship game, and I had to hold that tweet for about 15 minutes of real time, because what was a huge lead for Louisville with not a lot of time left, like the Tar Heel game against Duke, came down to a cruncher at the end. What's interesting is that, again, and by the way, when I picked Louisville 6th out of 18 teams in the preseason, people told me I was crazy because, of course, they had no returning scholarship players. This is a new coach, Pat Kelsey. He had to build from scratch. But I had done some research on several of his transfers, and some of them had been really good at their previous schools, right? Chucky Hepburn, one of our favorites, 3-year starter at Wisconsin. Javon Hadley had been a really good player at his previous school. And Coach Kelsey brought a couple of his guys with him from College of Charleston, so he clearly knew how they would fit his system. But what's interesting to me about Louisville's 2 wins this year over Clemson, 1 regular season, 1, of course, last night, we have to say, because we are now in the wee hours of Saturday morning. In game 1, regular season, it was Louisville's big guys outplaying Clemson's big guys. Ian Shefflin and Victor Locken did not have good games, and too much pressure was on Chase Hunter and the Clemson guards, and they just couldn't overcome the fact that Clemson's big guys, who are rarely outplayed, were outplayed in that Louisville regular season win. Today, I thought was the opposite. I thought essentially Pat Kelsey's guards played well. And until the end, Brad Brownell's guards did not play well. It was Chucky Hepburn, as usual, 6 steals, defensive player of the year in this league. He only had 12 points, but he had 5 assists. Terrence Edwards Jr. played a lot of really good defense on Chase Hunter. He ended up with 21 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists. And Javon Hadley had 20 points, 9 rebounds. Hadley killed Clemson in the regular season game, and he was brilliant again tonight. I do really believe, and this is not an excuse, right? Duke did overcome the absence of Malik Brown and Cooper Flagg and still beat Carolina. I'm bringing this up only as a game analysis item. I'm not making apologies for Clemson. But Chase Hunter's younger brother, Dylan Hunter, who broke his hand and was out today, it was crystal clear to me that essentially Clemson ran out of guards. They have incredible trust in first-team All-ACC Chase Hunter, of course. He's just a phenomenal player and one of the best in this league. They have tremendous confidence in Jaden Zachary, one of the better defensive players in this league. This is his 5th year of starting between junior college and his 3 years at Boston College and this one at Clemson. Nothing wrong with those two. I have confidence in Clemson heading to the NCAA tournament. Without Dylan Hunter, who was really their third guard, they had to really lean a lot on Jake Hydebreeder, who's a three-point shooter who didn't hit any threes. Del Jones, who's a great athlete and a good defender, but turned the ball over 3 times. They just didn't get anything that they needed from those guards not named Zachary and Hunter. And even though Chase Hunter did his best to rally, it was miraculous that he had them on the verge of that insane comeback. They just fell short, just like the Tar Heels eventually barely fell short. When you dig a hole that big, for the Heels in the first half, for Clemson basically for the third quarter of the game, if you will, is when they really fell behind. Again, more bouquets for the effort of the team trying to claw back. It just wasn't enough. And Pat Kelsey and the Cardinals have been good all year. Now this is 1 versus 2, right? Duke is the 1 seed, Louisville's the 2 seed, and you and I get to watch yet another ACC title game on Saturday night with both of them know, of course, they're going to the big dance. But this is either a school getting its first ever ACC title, Louisville, or that school you mentioned that's won 13 of the last 25 ACC tournaments, the Duke Blue Devils. And the fact that Louisville, like Carolina earlier, gets a shot at Duke without Cooper Flagg and without Malik Brown, that matters, right? Mm-hmm. What did Duke do to Carolina the 2 times they had closer to full health? They killed them. I mean, crushed them in Durham and then beat them by double digits in Chapel Hill after that was close for a while. Well, without their best player and their best reserve, they still beat the Tar Heels, but it was a close one. And that's why I would think if Louisville's got to feel a lot better about this rematch against Duke than they did in that regular season matchup, which was really all Blue Devils for a lot of different reasons.
It's going to be a lot of fun to watch all of the titles being handed out here in North Carolina on Saturday. We have the 2A and the 4A championships at the Joel Coliseum. 4 more state champions will be crowned. We're proud of our expanded association with the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. And of course, it's our bread and butter right here in Charlotte. Tomorrow night, it'll be Duke and Louisville.
Tonight, Mike, tonight.
That's right. Duke and Louisville tonight for the ACC Basketball Championship. For David Glenn, I am Mike Waddell. Enjoy your Saturday, and we'll see you later on tonight right here from the Queen City. Signing off right here all across the bold North State, Duke and Louisville in the finals of the ACC Tournament on the North Carolina Sports Network.
The moment we waited for, everything you want is right here. We gon' give them what they came for. We gon' take it up from last year. Shoot on my shot, boy, I'm long range. Me and the team on the same thing. Stayed down, never switched up. Only thing changed was the game. I'm in the zone now. Nothing can change what we on now. When I pull up, know it's going down. Foot on the gas, ain't no